I'm delighted that the next talk in this action-packed session is Dr. Stéphanie Swarbreck, who's going to be talking about TEF. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to tell you about the work that we've been doing with our collaborator, Kebebew Assefa, from the Ethiopian Institute of Agricultural Research, based in Addis. So I'll talk to you about TEF. TEF is a major crop that emerged in the Horn of Africa, mostly in Ethiopia and in Eritrea. So it is a crop that is very interesting because of its cultural importance in Ethiopia. It's a cereal crop. It's packed with proteins and micronutrients. It doesn't have any gluten, so it is quite interesting for many people. And it is used generally to make an injera. So the dough is prepared and fermented and then cooked on these large plates and then used to eat stew with it. So it's a really tall crop which produces really small grains, and it's cultivated mostly by smallholder farmer in Ethiopia. It's cultivated over 2.8 million hectares, and it covers about 30% of the cereal crop area in Ethiopia. It's a really interesting crop. So I'm a plant biologist, and it's a really interesting crop because it's well adapted to a range of environments. It grows very well at high altitude. It copes very well with the very wet soil that happens at the start of the season, and it copes pretty well as well with the drought at the end of the season. Though Kebebew, who is a breeder for TEF, one of the only breeders of TEF in Ethiopia, tell me that drought tolerance is still a breeding target for TEF. And for that purpose, deep root is quite interesting because it allows the plants to access water at depth. But one of the major constraints limiting TEF yield is lodging. And lodging is the permanent displacements of the stem. So as plants are falling over, the grain cannot be harvested and it gets spoiled as well. And there can be two main causes of the lodging. Either is the stem lodging, so the stem is it's not very strong, it will break, or the panicle, it's very heavy and kind of lead the plants to fall as well, or it's root lodging. So now lodging is a problem that is quite ubiquitous among cereals. There are loads of many other crops like wheat or rice will have a problem with lodging as well. And one of the solutions to that has been to be selecting crops that are shorter and they are less prone to lodging and they have a thicker stem. However, for smallholder farmer in Ethiopia, the straw that they can harvest as well as the grain is important. So having really shorter variety, it's not really attractive for them. So we need to think a bit more at how to solve this problem. So I've been concentrating on root lodging and how we can look at solving the issue of the lodging by selecting roots that would be supporting better. So we're looking at the angle of the root itself, having thicker individual roots and having bushier root system, so much more branchy. And you can see the root system is very fibrous and very limited. We have adapted a method to look at the root system in these clear pots. So the plants are grown at the interface of the soil and the clear pot, so it can be seen by transparency. And we can follow the developments of these roots over time. Generally, we can see this primary root that is really gravitropic. It's very thin. It grows very well to start with. And then a few days later, seminal roots are emerging. These are a little bit thicker, and they grow a little bit at an angle. And these are really important because they will help ensuring the anchorage of the plants to the soil, and would also typically grow much longer than the primary root. And you can start seeing these emerging here after 20 days post-planting, though these times are very condition dependent. So we collaborated with Professor Zerihun Tadele, who is at the University of Bern in Switzerland and who's worked with Kebebew Assefa for many years together. They've developed varieties that have been cultivated in Ethiopia. But what Zerihun has done is has developed a mutant population. So he's exposed seeds from a cultivar called Sede, which is a very popular variety of teff in Ethiopia, and he's exposed it to a mutation a chemical agent. So it's induced loads of changes in the DNA, created loads of mutation in thousands of lines. So we have been looking at these and looking at searching for different line or different genotypes that would have different or interesting phenotypes. Because this is quite interesting, we can then go back and identify which genes is being targeted. So we developed, we have the system of the clear pot method. It was thousands of pots. We had 16 plants per pot, so we could grow them all around. And then we put together a imaging system, so it's based on a low-cost Raspberry Pi. So there is a turntable, hold the pot, it turns, click, trigger the Raspberry Pi to take a camera. And we were able to take thousands of images of individual plants. And we've been going through all of these and measuring this angle here in particular, which is the one that I was mentioning earlier. So a wider angle is likely to protect and anchor the plants better. We are seeing quite lots of interesting phenotypes in that some of the roots have got very no angle and others have got wider. We see a range of about even lower than 25 to 75 degrees. In parallel to this work, our project kind of got changed because of COVID, and there was no opportunity for us to go there to Ethiopia. But in parallel, we had a discussion with Kasahan, who was working with Kebebew, and he developed this rhizotron system, which were a kind of a lower throughput, but also much more detailed way of looking at the root system. There is always a trade-off when we do root analysis between the details that we can get and the number of lines. And Kasahan focused on teff variety that were grown in Ethiopia and that were preferred by farmers there. And he measured the root angle, and we could get similar data from what we had in our clear pot for Sede, about 43 degrees. And he could also see a quite wide range of angle in those cultivated variety. When we tried to compare these data of the root angle with the lodging index that was measured, there was no clear significant correlation. So it was not that, those very wide angles are clearly protecting the teff against lodging. So it's a bit more complex than what we initially thought about. However, what was really interesting was that there were varieties that were adapted for moisture stress area. And these tended to have a much narrower root angle compared to those that were adapted to an optimum rainfall, for which the angle was much higher. So this is really interesting because it goes back to that idea that the narrower root system is enabling the plants to grow quite deep and access water at depth later on in the season particular. So we'll be continuing analyzing some of our roots and then hopefully sending Kebebew the line to be tested in the field as well. So I mentioned the lodging being an issue and the drought stress. One of the other constraints for teff production in Ethiopia is the weed competition. Teff seeds are really small, so they tend to be scattered on the ground. It's not the same as what you can imagine a wheat field where they've got rows and rows. So it's a little bit more, it's less organized in that sense, so it's much more difficult to weed and protect the crop. So there will be, teff seedlings growing in these conditions will be entering competition with loads of these. And the competition against weeds can really lower the yield by 20 to 38% if it's not conducted. if it is conducted, it is really time consuming. It's hours and hours of time picking up weeds in the field, and then this tends to be done by women, so there is a clearly gender aspect to this research as well. So we, while we were growing the plants in our glasshouses in north of Cambridge to test and look at the root system architecture, we also took images above ground and took a series of images as the plants were developing. And we are looking now at measuring how quickly the plants are covering the soil, because this would be a huge advantage. If a plant can germinate, seed can germinate very quickly, cover the ground, it will have a competitive advantage against some of the weeds that are growing nearby. So in summary, I think I started working on TEF through the opportunity of the Alborada Fund, and it's been really exciting time because TEF is an orphan crop, so there is very limited improvement that has been done. The yields tend to be very low, still 1 to 2 tons per hectare, while in the same conditions, maize can reach 4 tons per hectare. It's an orphan crop because it hasn't benefited from all of the advancements that wheat or rice have benefited. And some of the varieties that I've mentioned are very closely related to land races, so plants that will be growing in the wild or that have been selected and kept by farmers over the years, so very limited improvements. But there are a lot of us starting to work on TEF. A lot of us, the community is building through the help of the Alborada Fund and other funds that have combined. We now have several sequences of the genome, so it is possible to start do more molecular work on it. They have collaborated. We have collaborators who are able to modify it genetically. So there is a huge momentum at the moment working on TEF. And because of its cultural importance in Ethiopia and how we are all starting to eat a bit more diverse and like to eat different type of grain, it's a huge, it's really exciting time to be working on that grain. So to finish, I'd like to thank some of the students and researchers who have worked. Fazila Asmari is a lecturer at Bahida University who is continuing to help us with this analysis. Kasahan Adimke, who's worked on the rhizotron that we mentioned. And our collaborators, Ari and Tadley in particular, from Bern. And obviously, thank you very much for the Cambridge Alborada Fund that helped us. And if I have 1 more minute, I will tell you about another of our enterprises. I think this audience will be interested. So with Alison Bentley, who works at CIMMYT, who is the head of the Global Wheat Program, Laura Dexon, who is a lecturer at the University of Leeds, we have started developing this Women in Crop Science directory. The idea is that we are collating information from many women across the world who are working in crop science and building a community. On Zenodo, we have put information about why we are doing all of this. Promoting women in crop science is important. Many times we're finding ourselves in rooms just full of men, so it's quite nice to find other support. And we are highlighting, we have 177 women on the directory at the moment, and we'll be highlighting the 200 and 205. So please share the word if you are. And with this, I will stop. Thank you.